Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Inspire NT Science Outreach course. And for our talk today, we have Jared Wilkins, and he is going to talk about, he's from QuestaCon, and he's going to talk about the circus, the QuestaCon circus. And I think everybody have heard about it in one way or another. And part of this classroom, when we have students, but we also have some people that are not students here, but interested in science communication and science outreach. And our students have just gone through we did a inspired on the circles, but micro version of it earlier this semester, which was called Inspire NT Carnival. And we are very interested now to hear how we saw the challenge, which was just a small project. So we're very interested to hear how actually to manage this in a much larger scale as you do. And it will be very interesting for my students so they can add to their discussion in their report and compare. So thank you very much, Jared, to come here today on Zoom to talk to us about this. I know it's quite late in Canberra now, thanks to the change in the time zones. And we really appreciate it that you're still there and you can talk to us today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Carla, and hello. I can't see any of you. I'm speaking to black screen, so we'll have to see how this goes. If you want to know something, you'll need to call out or put something in the chat, and I won't be able to tell from your facial expressions whether or not you're falling asleep. So my role at QuestaCon is I'm the Senior Manager for National Programs. So all of the outreach programs that go off across Australia, I'm responsible for those. A little bit about me, I started off as a high school science teacher in Adelaide and then moved to Canberra and kept doing that. And then I had a 180-degree turn in my career pathway, and I actually went to run an arts festival for 7 years, and then I ended up at QuestaCon. And my role at QuestaCon, being responsible for all of the outreach programs, is a little blend of both of those, the science teaching and running large scale events for thousands of people. So what I wanted to do today is kind of cover off two main things. And one of those is, what is this thing, this science circus that we talk about, and how did it come about and how does it work? But also I thought it was important to take an opportunity to introduce you all to a tool that I find is really valuable and is really valuable for us here at QuestaCon, called program theory and program logic. I always think that if you go to a lecture, you should come away with something that's useful and practical and you can start implementing tomorrow. So that's the plan. Like all good stories, and today is a bit of a story, it starts with a man on a bicycle. The man on this bicycle is Professor Mike Gore, and he's the founder of QuestaCon. And back when he was teaching at the School of Physics at the Australian National University, he was quite despondent by the students who were coming into the university and felt that they didn't, for the most part, they got very few students, and they really wanted to be able to have more young people to value and engage with science and related fields. So he decided to have a think about this and see what it meant. And so he decided to kind of think this idea through, and he was lucky enough to go to San Francisco and visit a place called the Exploratorium, which had been founded by a gentleman named Robert Oppenheimer. And the name Oppenheimer may mean some things to some of you, and if it doesn't, I suggest go and research Robert Oppenheimer and the Exploratorium. But Mike had this thought around, well, I really want more young people to value and be engaged with science and related fields. And in order to do that, I really think that young people need to value science more. And young people are more likely to value something when they're engaged, and they're engaged when they're having fun. And really, I want to provide a way for science to be fun for all of these people. So he started to think about how to do that. And the outcome was, I think I need to build a hands-on science centre. And so QuestaCon was born. And this is the main room of QuestaCon. back in 1985. It's the disused hall of a primary school that was repurposed to be Questacon. And you can probably see some familiar science exhibits here. And so Questacon was open to the public in Canberra, and the public and school students flocked to it. It was always very busy with school students visiting it and taking part, because everything was hands-on. Everything could be touched, everything could be manipulated, and if you did something to it, then you would get a result. So it was, of course, very engaging, it was very fun, and there were scientific concepts that were explained to them. And you can see some people in white coats. Those were the explainers, and it was their job to explain the science concepts and to guide the students in how it all worked. So when Mike revisited his ideas, we had, well, here's this thing called Questacon, and when they come to Questacon, they're engaged and they're having fun. I've provided a way for science to be fun, and we're seeing that young people are valuing science more. But what he discovered was that really one of the outcomes had changed, and it was more young Canberrans that were visiting it. It wasn't going out to all of Australia like he hoped. It was just the Canberrans. So he had to think about, how can I take my approach and reinvigorate it so that it's more young Australians? And of course, if you want to get out to more young Australians, then you have to start moving. And a good way to move back in those days was, of course, to use a removalist truck. So he borrowed a removalist truck. He got some money for the petrol in order to drive this removalist truck. They packed it full of exhibits from Questacon and decided to move it off to somewhere else. Now, if you're going to move Questacon to somewhere else, you have to have some people that can help you do it. Now, Professor Gore was still a lecturer of physics at the Australian National University, so he was able to call on this lot. And these are some of the students that were studying physics at ANU back in the early and mid 1980s. The gentleman in the dark cardigan and with the glasses, he is Professor John Close, and he now runs one of the specific labs at the ANU that is doing all sorts of research into the Earth's magnetic field and to GPS and to laser guidance and all sorts of amazing things. And the gentleman crouching down on the floor is Professor Stuart Colhagen, who is also well known in the Australian and even the international science communication fields nowadays. So with a removalist truck and with a handful of students who are available to help, they moved aspects of Questacon out into a school in Goulburn, which is about an hour and a half's drive north of Canberra. And so that was the start of taking Questacon out onto the road and getting it in front of more Australians. So as sometimes people say to me, that's a great story. What's it got to do with anything? Well, from that little beginning, it was the first ever tour of what would become the Science Circus, as I said, but also the example that I've just taken you from is an example of a simple program logic. So what exactly is the program logic? Well, moving on from and putting a few explainers into the situation that I just took you through, a program logic is a way of defining a program within an organization. And it's a way of setting things out so that you can see a logical flow from things that you did to the outcomes that you got towards meeting a goal that you might have. So in this instance, for this story, we had a resource or an input that was Questacon, one furniture removal truck, and a handful of ANU students. Putting those all together, they were able to have young people being engaged by having fun. They were providing science in a fun way. The young people value science more, and it was up to lead to Mike's broad goal of more young Australians value and are engaged with science and related fields. So that's a really simple program logic, and I find them incredibly useful, and we use them across all of the programs that we do here at Questacon to articulate what we're up to. So what is a program logic? A little bit of what I just explained. It's this tool to help you clarify and depict a program. What it does, and what I think is really important, is that this is about program planning, and it helps you think your way through logically what you want to achieve. Once you've got one in place, then it's a really great example of program management. You can always refer to it and it keeps you on track. So you suddenly don't get a brand new idea where you're thinking of doing something different and it takes you off in another direction. The program logic can keep you on track. It's about communication. It's a great way that if you've got a large team or you want to share with people exactly what you're up to, then you can come to a common understanding by using a program logic to demonstrate exactly what you're up to. And of course, the other great thing that it does is it helps you with evaluation. You can clearly see how you will demonstrate success by meeting your outcomes or meeting your goals. So a program logic just fits this kind of simple description, but they're really, really useful. And what I'm going to do is kind of take you through some examples of how we apply them and how they get used. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll think, hey, that's a great idea. Maybe I'm going to give that a go too. So program logic ideally has these 5 parts to it. It has a broad goal. So normally this is something quite audacious and something big that you want to do. And it's really about almost non-achievable. What do we really want to change in society or in our environment or in the economy, partly because of our program? And really, it is so audacious that perhaps there are so many other factors that apply to it that we're really just hanging our hat against it. And it's quite difficult for us to measure that we're a part of that. But what we are able to measure are these things that sit below it called program outcomes. So what's the final result of our program that we're trying to achieve? What's the change that we want to see over a long time from doing the thing that we do? And then we have these intermediate outcomes. So what are the changes in our program participants, the audience that we're delivering to, or perhaps the organization that we may be working with as a result of our program? So you can see as we move down this page, things are getting easier to define and easier to understand. So then we have the activities or the outputs. So the specific actions that make up the program, the activities, and sometimes we use the word interventions that we put in place in order to achieve our outcomes. And then of course we have the resources and the inputs. So what you need to operate and deliver each of these activities. So the other part that's really important about the program logic is that there is a logic behind them. Okay, and so how we articulate it is by a series of if-then statements. So we have at the top this situation, this issue, this really broad goal that we want to be able to reach. And so we need to work out what's the input. If we invest this, then we can do this, which are these series of activities. Through doing these series of activities, then we see these change that is achieved, which gives us our outcomes. And then we can say, hey, we got those outcomes, therefore we've led to our broad goal. And the important thing to note is that a program logic is based on cause and effect. As we go through this and you see them as being a little bit more complex, they're not just about random boxes. Each thing leads on to a next one. This clear logic that underpins it. If we invest this, then we can do this. Then this is the change that we're going to end up with. So that's one way of describing it. Going back to kind of the model that I was using before with the science circus, if we put our if-then statements in, So it looks a little bit like this. If we invest these resources, then we can do these activities. Through doing these activities, then we get this change in fairly quickly. Then we see this result, which is our program outcome. Then we meet our goal, which is a broad goal. And the broad goal always links up to a problem statement, which is the issue that we're trying to solve. And so we tend to work, even though I'm showing this kind of a circular, normally start at the top with a problem statement and then work our way down through to work out how to do that. Program logics will shift in different ways depending on how we want to articulate it. And towards the end of this, I'm going to share a couple of distinct models that we use at Questacon and that we've tried over the years. So let's look at a quick example. Is my screen going to change? No, it's not. Oh, yes, there we go. Okay, so my problem statement is that the family are stressed and they're taking it out on each other. And so I need to be able to solve this problem. What I've decided to do is that one way to meet the goal to kind of de-stress the family and to stop them being mean to each other is to have this continued good family relationship. So that's the goal that I want to achieve. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to make sure that my family members have a great time and enjoy a holiday together. I'm going to make sure that the family members go away for that holiday because it's far easier to enjoy it when you're away from home. To do this, we need to get tickets, we need to book some accommodation, we need to work out a schedule for our family, and we need to invest some money, time, and research in order to do that. So if we invest money, time, and research, then we can get the tickets, accommodation, and you can see how that flows back up. So this is a good little model of a program logic in action. You can see that if-then statement. So it's a way of trying to solve this big problem statement that we have and working through the steps. Now, in this program logic model, the way that we've articulated is starting at the bottom and working our way up. With most of the ways when you'd work through it yourself, you'd actually start with the problem statement. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then work down to your goal, then work down to your result. So there's a difference in the way that you would work through it as an organization or as a group, which is almost backwards from the way that you usually see them described or articulated in one way. So it looks like there are a couple of people who are able to talk. I can see some people lurking there, and I know Carla's got some people with them. So let's have a go. Here's a problem statement. People don't catch the train because of safety fears as cars are being broken into at the station car park. Why? Why would this be the case? What would be stopping people catching the train because they're worried about their car being broken into at the station car park? What could be a goal that we would want in place in order to solve this problem? Anyone got an idea?
To get better security at the train station.
Yep. There we go. That's a good one. Better security at the train station. Any others?
Improve access to, oh, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Ah, cool. Improve access to the train so that people don't have to drive to the station.
Yep.
So is our goal actually that we want people to catch the train?
Ah, very good. So really our goal is that we want people to be able to catch the train. So that's our broad goal that we want to have. So let me ask you then the next question. If we want more people to catch the train, what can we put in place? What would be the outcomes that from our program that would enable more people to catch the train?
Well, apart from the security, maybe show stats that cars are not broken, if that's the case.
That's a good one. So security is one. Showing people some statistics that their cars aren't really being broken into as much as they think they are. Anything else? Okay, let's leave it at that. We've got two different outcomes. Let's look at the first one, which was improving the security. So our program outcome is we want to improve the security. How can we improve the security? What sort of immediate outcomes could we put in place in order to improve the security?
Employee security staff.
Employer security guard, yep, there's one. Any others?
Set up CCTV.
Set up CCTV, there's another one. Any others?
Get better lighting at the station.
Better lighting, yep, good. Any others? No, sounds good. So we've got a series of immediate outcomes that are in place. So if we're going to put a security guard in place, then the activity would be to hire a security guard. If we're going to improve the lighting, have improved lighting, then the activity would be to put in some more lights. If we're going to, what was the other one that I've forgotten?
The camera.
Oh, CCTV. We're going to have better CCTV, so the activities would need to put in some CCTV cameras. If we looked at one of the other immediate outcome, which was around actually demonstrating to people that cars aren't broken into as much, what would we need to have in place in order to demonstrate that?
Do some data collection to see if that's actually true first.
Yeah, we'd need some statistics in place in order to do that. And in order to collect those statistics, what type of activity would we need to do?
Employ somebody to do some iPad questionnaires, survey.
Yeah. See if there's, get someone to go and do some research and undertake some activity. So you can see how we're working backwards through these different responses in order to get to this problem statement that we wanted to do, which was about people don't catch the train because cars are being broken into at the station. And if we are able to put our investment in place, do these activities and these outputs, we get this intermediate outcomes. We're improving the situation, and hopefully we'll end up with more people being able to catch the train. I've used this example previously, and one of the people said, well, if the issue is about people are worried because cars are being broken into at the train station, what would happen if you remove the entire car park from the train station? What kind of outcome would that have on the people and as the final result? So sometimes working through these program logic tools is a way to also think outside the box and come out with something a little bit different. So that's a little bit of a practical example of just working it through quickly just with us. Using these if-then statements and applying them to the example that I used previously with the science circus, we get to this bit of, if we invest in Questacon, one furniture removal truck, and a handful of ANU students, then we can get young people are engaged by having fun, and we can provide science in a fun way in a different place. And you can see how that moves along. So they're those if-then statements. And then if we use the terms that we saw previously within the program logic, that would explain it out. Now, as we covered with the example that we just worked through around security, after the science circus had gone on the road and they'd done it for a while, they started to find that there were more things that came in place after that first tour to Goulburn. And Goulburn was such a success that they decided to invest a few more resources in it and to change the activities, because it was one thing to go to Goulburn, but if you really want to go across all of Australia, you're going to have to do a little bit more than that. And you're going to have to find some activities that are a bit different. And so the next generation, or the next iteration of the science circus, started to look a bit more like this, where the activities and the outputs were the science circus, but also the creation of a qualification in science communication. So a grad dip in science communication from the Australian National University. And then they started to rethink about what were the immediate outcomes. And for the science circus, it was very much about students having an increased interest in science and graduates who can communicate science to a wide audience. So what you're also starting to see as this program logic developed over time is we're starting to see two streams forming within this. One of them is about the young people and the families and thinking about that aspect of more Australians valuing and engaging in science. But there are also outcomes for the ANU students who are being a part of it as well. So program logic can start to combine different aspects within it in order to create things. So here's what they started to think would be a great structure in order to move the science circus forward into its next evolution. And so following on from that, you got this. So this is one of the first cohorts of the science circus outside Questacon just after it opened in 1988, demonstrating all the fun things that they get to do. And then one of them off in a school doing a science demonstration, probably involving either liquid nitrogen or dry ice in some water. I can't tell from here if that vessel that she's holding is plastic or glass, but it's probably one or the other. So a program logic, when you start to put different outputs into it and you start to look at different activities that you want to run and the change effect that you want to see, they can start to be a little bit more complex. They can sometimes be incredibly complex, and you can start to get to this point where there are multiple program outcomes. Each of those program outcomes may have multiple intermediate outcomes that lead into it, and there could be a whole range of program activities and outputs that lead into it as well. Because with the science circus, we've still got this, what we're calling now, this overall need, this problem that we want to solve, which is this better future for all Australians through engagement with science, technology, and innovation. And you need to start making decisions about who you're going to work with and how you're going to do that, because we had this broad goal about more young Australians value and engaged with science and its related fields. So you start to explore, well, what are new things that we could do? What are new activities that are in place that we may want to work with? Maybe we want to focus on some of the key influences on young people, especially when it comes to their engagement or their appreciation or even their comfort with science and technology. And so perhaps we'd want to work with their grandparents, because grandparents and parents are really influential on young people making decisions about what they're interested in, where they're going to go. Maybe we want to focus on really marginalized communities who don't get a whole lot of science engagement activity, and to go to those who are at risk or are in regions where they get very little, Or perhaps we want to focus on educators and get them upskilled and more confident in things that you can do. So every time a new opportunity comes up, it's worth going through this program logic tool, once again, that you may have to kind of make sure that the things that you're doing fit with what you want to do. So here's an example of when we sat down and thought, well, we think it's really vital to work with teachers. How do we do that? What's the program outcome we're looking for? How do we make sure that, what are the intermediate outcomes that we're able to see? And then what are the program activities that we want to design in order to meet our outcomes and our broad goal? So that's one little snapshot. Now, if you ask me today and say, okay, what does the Science Circus program logic look like? It looks like this. So you can see that there are kind of 5 main streams within our program logic, one about general community and local science-based organisations, one about in-school students themselves, one about at-risk students, teachers, ANU and graduates. Now, why is that identified at-risk one a different colour to the others? That's because it's something that we've wanted to do for the last few years, but haven't really been in a position in order to able to do it. So we've left it on our program logic to say it's something that we think is of value, but we haven't really been able to invest in it in a way that we would like to. So that's why, and this is what our program logic looks like for the Science Circus at the moment. You can clearly see that flow of logic that says, well, if we do these, then it will lead to this intermediate outcome. Then we see these program outcomes. So program logics are a really great way for us to articulate to an audience like you or any other stakeholder, hey, this is what we do and this is why we do it and this is how we do it. So it's working through that process. The other really great thing that program logics are for, and I mentioned it at the start, is not just working out what you're going to do, but it's working out how you're going to prove that what you've done works. And so by thinking through what are our program outcomes and our intermediate outcomes, you can then start putting evaluation and monitoring measures specifically against those. So after a period of time, you can say, well, yes, we did that because here's the evidence to prove it. And this is how it links with our program logic. So that's a way that you put the evidence forward to then say, hey, this is how we're meeting our broad goal, and that's how it's leading to the overall need. Now, to go back to the educators, I just thought I'd share. So this is what we have in place. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've taken the aspect of the program logic that relates to teachers, and then on the right-hand side, I've shown the evaluation and monitoring measures that we have in place. So you can see that for the activities, we're very much interested in quantitative measures, numbers of, people who attended or things that used. When we're talking about the intermediate outcomes, so these are things that have happened fairly quickly. We're asking questions of teachers for their pre and post change in behaviour or understanding or confidence or skills that we're able to do fairly quickly. So after you've done this workshop with us, how do you feel now? And what from this workshop are you going to use? So that's evidence that we can then put forward and say, hey, teachers gain confidence. Then our program outcomes tend to be a little bit longer. And so perhaps 6 months, 9 months, 12, 24 months after we may have done the activity with the teachers, we'll go back and ask them the questions again. So are you still using those concepts and resources? Has your self-efficacy increased? Has your enjoyment in teaching science increased? And are you sharing the resources? Because these types of questions and their responses get to demonstrate our program outcomes. This is our whole story that we put in place against our program logic to say, hey, this thing that we're doing is really, really worth it. And here's the response to it. So we have a very clear, concise logic to demonstrate what we're doing and the reason that we're doing it and the success that we have. So I'm not sure if all of you have seen the Science Circus in action. And while I can't show you the whole of the Science Circus in action, I do want to take this small chance for me to get a quick break, but also to demonstrate quite quickly in a normal year what a pop-up Science Centre exhibition experience looks like. So this was taken, I believe, in Gladstone in Queensland, and this is a sports stadium in Gladstone in the morning before our pop-up science experience. Each of those little tubs is a hands-on science exhibit. The thing that's being built up the back is a stage from which the performers do a science show, and then it's just a steady stream of people who come in, and then a science show happens and they all flood back and they flood to the science show, and then they come back. People will spend anywhere from 30 minutes up to 4 hours. The biggest audience that we've had at one of these pop-ups in a single day is just over 5,000 people in Hobart back in 2018. And so after the Science Circus has bumped into one of these venues, everything then gets bumped back out and it gets reset for what happens in the next day. So there's a 1-minute version of what a Science Circus pop-up, one of the main activities that we deliver, looks like. So I thought I might just quickly go through 2020 as well. So for the Science Circus for 2020, this is what their year was designed to look like. They were going to do a trial tour in around Canberra. They were then going to go up to the mid-coast of Queensland. They were then going to do a tour through parts of New South Wales and Victoria. And then at this time of year, they were supposed to be in Tasmania. And so we had 13 students doing a Master of Science Communication outreach from the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science at the Australian National University. Here they are on their first week in Canberra, getting all geared up and ready to go across the country before, of course, the entire world blew up on them. And we had to sit down and go, we have this program that has this broad goal and has these specific outcomes, but now we're in this position because of, initially it was just bushfires near the Canberra region and then a global pandemic. How do we ensure that we're still able to meet our broad goal and still able to meet our intermediate outcomes by doing something a little bit different? And what we did was we turned to our program logic and went, well, what are the things that we can't do, but what are the things that we can still do by changing perhaps the way in the activity is delivered? And you can see that one of the things that is missing that was there previously was a column on the left-hand side that had the public science exhibits in it, what I just showed you in that short video. So we had to throw that out. It wasn't possible in a COVID world to tour that across the country, but we could still do things for school students. And what we found out is that by changing the way that we did things, we could also tap into that group that we weren't able to tap into before by working with identified at-risk students. And we were able to find some opportunities here in Canberra, because we weren't touring across the country, to really start to look at at-risk students in areas of disadvantage by tapping in through remote learning. And we were able to do specific programs for Indigenous students here in the ACT and in the local region. We were still able to provide things for teachers, and we were still able to provide things for the ANU. So just as an example and how we change things, term 2 for the The Science Circus students, which was supposed to be in that mid-north coast of Queensland region, turned into 4 weeks of virtual workshop delivery. They were all working from home. They engaged with 20 schools. They did almost 90 workshops and saw just over 2,000 students. And so typically they would have just had an experience in that little spot of Queensland, but you can see suddenly by doing things virtually, you could be all over. The beautiful thing about virtual is that everyone only sees what they see through the camera. They don't actually get to see the environment that you're working in. So for the Science Circus students for that first tour, they were working like this at home with green screens made up of 4 bits of green cardboard, laptops, all sorts of interesting contraptions to hold secondary cameras, which are tablets. We were able to drop gear off to them and do some virtual training in how to run virtual workshops. Thankfully nowadays, they're able to come into one of our centres here at Deakin and our centre at Parks, and they can use our pop-up virtual studios that we created in order to do that engagement with audiences across Australia, and they're still doing that. Right today, because things have changed in the COVID world, at least here in the ACT, just as they have in the Northern Territory, they're actually able to start going into schools. So they've started today doing some in-school tours, but with changes into the way that they deliver their activities with physical distancing in place and no student volunteers and specific rules around how they operate. So that's a little bit about how the Science Circus has sort of changed and how it looks today. But of course, we need to keep thinking about how it looks in the future, and that's where the program logics come in place. Which is probably a good segue to kind of say, well, that's a great story. Can we go back to the program logics now? Because that may be something that we want to use. So I just want to take a little bit of time to kind of step through a couple of program logics with you. This is the Logic Model Development Guide. This is where this framework comes from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And if you're wondering, yes, it is that Kellogg that started the cereal empire. They've actually invested a whole lot in this type of research around logic models. And that development guide is really quite a useful tool. The way that they frame things is this idea of, you know, what's the situation? What do we invest? What do we do? Who do we reach? What results do we see? And what changes do we see? And starting to lead into this idea again of immediate outcomes, medium outcomes, and far longer term outcomes. And I think that way that they frame these outcomes about intermediate being about awareness, knowledge, and skills, the outcomes in the medium term being about practice and behavior and decision making, and then the longer ones being around, you know, those conditions, maybe about employment or economic or social, those types of things that are in place. Another interesting model that's out there, this one's from the Innovation Network, and you can see their website up there, innonet.org, and you can see it's just a slightly different way of structuring a logic model. But again, the same things are there. The problem statement, the broad goal, the resources, what kind of activity, the outputs, and then the short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes that you want to have. Recently, I've started using a slightly different framework, which is a 2-part one, which uses the program theory. So one of the things that the logic models hasn't included was, where does the theory behind what we're doing sit? And so by putting this program theory part in place, we can start to talk about, well, what's the research around the issue and the problem that we want to solve? What does a strategic response look like? And who are the participants that need to be a part of this? It may not be just those who are a part of the activity, but it may be the broader part of the participants. And so having this program theory that kind of explains what's going on in the background, that then leads into the logic model, And you can see here it is, again, the activities, the outputs, the short-term outcomes and the longer-term outcomes. And then the impact that we're having at the end. Again, it's just a different way of showing the information that we were showing in those previous models. What does it look like when you fill it out? Here's an example for a program that we operate here at Questacon called Engineering is Elementary. It's all about here's the program theory. You can see the issues that are there and how we're going to tackle them, what our strategic response with, a bit about the participants and the inputs that are in place as well, and then completing out the logic model itself. So they're just some examples of what they can look like and different ways they can work. And I'll talk about some of the key principles in a little bit, but one of the important ones is that, hey, choose something that works for you and that works for your organization, because you want to make sure that it's clear and concise. The other really important bit about program logics is that they don't stay the same. You want to be able to use them to develop over time. And so they're a key part of your program cycle. You would have seen that, you know, we've had a whole lot of different ones for the science circus over the years, just as for all the Questacon programs. And they're really key that you have them for, you know, a development phase, your planning phase, implementation, and then you do some analysis and reflection, and then you go back into the development again. And so program logic is really important in the program cycle in keeping things going. A few key principles about program logics that I wanted to share. You know, make it easy to read when you're working through it. You want all the sentences to be really clear, really short, really concise. You want to be happy and positive in what you're doing too. It's no, oh, well, yeah, maybe, you know, might get this. You want to say, hey, yeah, we're going to do this. It's going to be great and it's going to work out for everyone. When you're developing it, you want to use a broad range of people too. It shouldn't just be one person in a room. You want to have a few people, spend some time working through it, going back through it and making sure that it's clearly following a logic that goes back to that logic we had at the start that you're able to work out. There's no single style or template. You've seen a whole lot today. Do what works for you. It has to be logical and meaningful, very important. The other aspect is don't force the model, okay? Not everything has to link up with everything else. It is okay to have, maybe it just goes 3 steps and doesn't go any further. Then you can make a decision about, well, you know what? It's still important that we do it, or maybe we need to take it out. Make it as large or as small as you need. We have a whole range. Some of them are really complex at Questacon, and then we'd like to break them down into smaller bits depending on the parts that we do. And as you've seen in this one, occasionally I've taken out the aspect for the teachers in order to make it a bit clearer or to demonstrate, hey, this is why we do the teacher one. So the science circus one actually fits into a bigger one that we have for all of Questacon's outreach programs. And then the Questacon outreach programs fits into the bigger one that we have for Questacon. So they can get quite complex. And review it, okay? Go through each year and just make sure it's doing what you want to do and it's explaining what you want to explain. The bit at the bottom is also about be aware of unintended consequences. Sometimes something comes up that you're not expecting and maybe wasn't in the logic at the start, but by reviewing it, you can put it in place. And that's why I've got a little note there that says 500 alumni. So these 5 people on the floor of the staff room in the physics school at ANU back in the mid-80s, which eventually turned into these 13 wonderful people who are the science circus for this year. They're part of now a cohort of 500 alumni that have been through the science circus. And those 500 work in all sorts of careers. One of them is Dr. Bobby Serini, the Deputy Director of Questacon. One of them is Duncan McIntyre, who's the head of the Department of Industry Energy Resources Division. One of them is the current weatherman on ABC breakfast program. Two of them are on radio here in Canberra. One of them is currently a host for Wild TV, and then there's a whole lot scattered across science centres, museums, science organisations, government departments all over in Australia. And they're a little bit of unintended consequence. When we started to bring those ANU students back in the 80s into this program, little did we think we'd have this huge influence on the science communication and science engagement sector internationally. So that finishes what I wanted to talk to you about today. If you're looking for me, I'm Jared Wilkins, jared.wilkins@questacon.edu.au. If you want to find out some more about Questacon, questacon.edu.au. If you know anyone who may like to have a science circus experience next year or in the future, then I recommend that you go have a look at the ANU Master of Science Communication Outreach. Applications are still open until the end of this month for the 2021 intake, which I think will be very different to the 2020 intake. If you want some information on that, you can go to cpas.anu.edu.au. And that's all from me today. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions they might like to ask?
Thank you, Jared. That was really interesting. And I have just been looking at some tips that I could use here. And do you mind if you share this PowerPoint with us?
Absolutely not. I'll flick it through to you, Carla, and then it's available for everyone. And I'll actually throw in a few additional resources in the pack that I send to you too.
Fantastic. And then I can share with everybody. Do we have any questions here?
Yeah, looking at the logic model, why does it have to be a broad outcome? Why not a specific outcome? Like with the example we had with the train. I mean, we already know why people don't want to go to use the train, because their cars are broken into. Why isn't the main issue to look at is to get people not breaking that, getting their cars broken into? Why does it have to be broad? Why not specific? Why not specific issues to tackle?
Depending on the circumstance that you may have, you could use it for just something that is very targeted and very specific. But normally for most organizations, it's about demonstrating how do we fit into a really big picture. The example that I kind of used with the train is sort of making it really simple, but normally with a program logic, you are trying to demonstrate how you fit into making a very big societal change in order to demonstrate your worth as a program or your worth as an organization. And that tends to fit into very high level goals for organizations or for government or for anyone. In saying that, you're absolutely correct. If you do have a specific thing, then you can use the same tool to just perhaps reach an intermediate outcome. It's up to you, I guess, to work out, well, what's the highest level thing that I need to meet?
It's more of a comment than a question, but I really enjoyed your talk. And I think for me, it just, I suppose, reminded me that something like the program logic, that sort of planning is very underrated, and you wouldn't necessarily think that such a simple framework could help you plan something as complicated as a national science communication program. It's sort of easy to get bogged down in the complexity as your program or your work gets busier and busier. And I suppose the beauty of what you showed us today is it's simple, but it's also very easy to scale up. It's just nice to be reminded sometimes that things don't necessarily have to get very complicated as they grow larger.
No, and you know, there was a whole of Australian government initiative called the National Innovation and Science Agenda, which came out in 2014. That whole agenda started with a program logic workshop, which was essentially, this is what we want to do. How do we then work our way through each of the steps in order to articulate what it is about and how it operates? And, you know, even though there was a very big one that kind of finished at this bit of, well, we know that we want to do, because it was all about pushing an innovation agenda in Australia, it you know, the activities that it was ending at was kind of, oh, give money to school programs or give money to industry to do this or those sorts of things. So sometimes very big, very complex things can start off, and it's great to kind of work them through very simply, because then you understand what you're trying to do and everyone understands what you're trying to do, and you can work out what the evaluation and measuring that you're going to put in place is. And that's a really important part of when you're doing something, and perhaps you're doing something for a funding organisation or you need to justify your existence. If you've worked all this through, then you're good to go. So it's always great when you're thinking of starting something new, just going through this program logic approach. And it can be done very simply, and it doesn't have to take weeks. It can be done in hours, and then you just come back and you rethink it. You know, they're never set in stone. They're always there to be reviewed and altered. And then when someone wants you to do something completely random, you can look at your program logic and go, that doesn't fit with what we're about and what we're trying to do. We're not going to do that. And that's a really powerful thing too, the ability to say no to something.
Thank you.
So would you make changes during, like, after you have put in the logic program, then you're undergoing the project, then something random comes up? Would you change or would you make changes right there and then or within that time frame? Or would you stick to the plan and maybe the next time?
It depends. It depends if, you know, if it is an activity that we're able to do and that we get resource to do that enables us to meet the outcomes that we have, then maybe we will put it in place. But if it's an activity that doesn't meet any of the outcomes that we're supposed to do with this program, and it doesn't provide us with necessarily the resources that fit either, then we'd say no. We're not, you know, we can't do it at this stage. I haven't shown it to you, but maybe I'll send it up, which is we actually have a complete science circus logic model, which has, I think it has 10 different activity streams in it. And so it does have that activity stream for like people in nursing homes or parents who don't have good backgrounds in science and all of those sorts of other components as well. But we don't utilize them all at the same time. We've thrown them out, or if someone does come with something, then we've been able to articulate how it does fit. So we do have a level of comfort if it comes to that.
I think just that power of being able to say no, actually just going back and say, no, this is looking back on the program that we run here, this is such an important thing, because a lot of interesting things knocking our door, but sometimes you need to be able to distinguish, oh no, this is not our main outcome, part of we should focus. And I think that's very important in a program.
And a tool like this is often a case where you've got a good communication tool that's well evidenced and shows your thinking behind it, and it's a logic process. If someone says, oh, we want you to do X, and you say, well, it doesn't help us achieve our outcomes, here's what our outcomes are, and here's how we've thought it through, it can be a powerful tool to change your mind.
Yeah, no, that's right. Oh, I really like it. I might do one for Inspire NT the next month or so. Do we have any questions from the online audience? Slav and Shingin, Thomas, you're there. You can just say it, unmute yourself and say, or you can put in the chat. We're running a little bit late here, but we would have time for an extra question.
No real questions, but I'd just like to say thank you to Jared and the rest of the Question guys for all the work they do. It's been, we've had some work with them here in the libraries, including like the digital outreach, and borrowed some of these science circus tubs, which we've got here. And it's been just really great working with you guys. And yeah, glad to see a bit of the behind the scenes of how it works.
And, you know, the thing that Thomas is talking about, I haven't talked about some of our other outreach programs, but sitting within another of our outreach programs, our innovation programs, there's always been this bit about we want to work with libraries. Libraries are really interesting to us, but we're so busy doing all these other things and having to tour around Australia, we don't have the capacity to work with libraries. Well, when the pandemic came in place and we didn't have to travel around Australia, we were able to invest some time and make some connections and start to rethink things in order to do this work with libraries, because we always knew that libraries are an important part of community and are an important part for reaching an audience that we don't normally reach with our programs. But here was an opportunity that came up, which was something that fit with our theory and sat within our logic, but we'd never had an ability to do it previously. So that's an example of where we've been able to put something in place that came up at an opportune time, and we were resourced to be able to do it.
And we have one comment here in the chat. That's from Sulab saying thank you. He has been studying logic, modern community engagement, biosecurity in Mary framework. It was good to learn from you again, Jared.
Yeah, look, being able to use this tool and being able to evidence to employers or anyone else that this is something that you can do. The logic models sort of started in the 1950s and 60s, and they've sort of developed along, but they're having a really big push at the moment, especially in government and in the not-for-profit sector. The use of logic models has exploded.
Well, thank you again, Jared. That was great. I think we got a lot out of this talk, and we will make it available on our YouTube channel for Inspire NT. And yeah, we're looking forward to receive some of the material. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a good evening, you all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.